Dobrodošli and welcome back. This week, with the warm weather of summer approaching, we have lots of clipping and weeding and tidying up that needs to happen in the garden. Lots of little jobs this week.
Bok, I'm Mandy O. This is Grow, Make, Cook, and welcome to my garden. I grew up in Australia in a permaculture family, but after we got married, Mr. O and I moved here to his home country of Croatia. I am a passionate and hands-on homemaker and gardener, and I love life's simple pleasures. So join me on my journey, and together we can learn to grow, make, and cook. This week, we've finished constructing our vole experiment, make some plant food, celebrate chamomile, and plant out our beans. So let's dig in to the second week in June, or Lipan.
With scissors seems like a very odd way to be cutting and clearing the grass underneath my peach tree, but it's for good reason, because I'm also harvesting this. This is copriva, or stinging nettles, and most people consider it a weed, but I let it grow quite long under here because it's actually a really useful plant in the garden. Now that it's warm, I've finally been able to plant out some things like tomatoes, and I've planted some zucchini seeds, and these are really hungry plants, and so you need to make a sort of tonic or feed or weed tea, I guess, in order to feed them. Now, I use the copriva leaves, the nettle leaves, to make that. They're really rich in nitrogen and they've got some potassium and things in there, so they'll help leaves and fruit for your tomatoes. I'm also cutting them quite long so that I've kept a lot of the stem, and that's really useful in that you can dry it and then turn it into a coarse fibre for making garden string. So, a really useful plant, not just a weed. Now this job is far from done, but there is one more very important thing to know about copriva, apart from the fact that it stings, is that it's also edible. Yes, this horrible spiky plant, I personally think tastes terrible, but is actually a very, very nutritious green, and it's very commonly used here for tea. And according to half the bakas, or grandmothers, I've ever spoken to, a tea made from nettles will cure almost anything that rakia, or brandy, won't. To make my weed tea, or fertilizer, or whatever you want to call it, I'm just stripping the leaves off the nettles, fresh, and throwing them into this old milk jug. Now this milk jug is great because it's got a lid, which is really important because this, when it starts fermenting and breaking down, gets really smelly. But we just really want the leaves for that, so in they go, into the pot. Nettles are a very traditional fibre plant. In fact, we've been using nettles for fibre for thousands of years. I believe it was in Denmark. They found a Bronze Age body wrapped up in fabric made from nettle fibre. It's really strong, which makes it really good for using for garden string. However, just because I've left mine very long to make string doesn't mean that's the only way to harvest them. If you're going to make tea, or if you're going to eat the greens, then you should harvest them much younger than this. These have just started to go over into flower. You can't see that very clearly, but the flower tops are just starting to form there, and you shouldn't harvest them for leaves once they've started to go into flower. You should harvest them much younger. But I don't really like them, so I'm not going to eat them. I'm going to feed them to my tomatoes, and then I'm going to eat those. So now that this is packed full, I'm just going to add water, and you just fill
fill this up now that it's completely full of copriva leaves. Just keep pouring water in until it covers the top. And this will make our fertilizer. And this is my bundle of the copriva stems, which I've now got to let dry so that we can do something with those next week. Down here in the garden bed by the elder, my Tuscan kale has gone over into seed. You can see here really clearly that the seeds are starting to form inside those pods. They're not really mature yet, but they're definitely there. Time to start sowing. So, because those seeds are really starting to form now on my Tuscan kale, it's time for me to start sowing new ones for this year. So, what I've got here is actually some seed I saved last year. It's not very well saved, it's not very well separated, but that won't matter. And all I'm going to do is sow it into this old egg carton. So just pop your compost in, just fill it up full. And then all I'm going to do is take small amounts of these seeds. Doesn't matter if there's some of the, you can see there's the shells from the seeds from last year. So it doesn't matter if we've got a little bit of that. All I'm going to do is sprinkle a little bit quite thinly along the top. I just saved one plant last year and I've still got all of this seed. I even sowed some in autumn from this same lot of seed saved kale, and I get enough sowings of kale from just one plant each year. I'm just now going to take a little bit of compost, nice loose stuff, and I'm just going to sprinkle it lightly on top. We just want just a little bit just to dress the top of them. The last step is to give it a thorough but very gentle soak with the rose attachment so that you don't wash all those seeds away. One thing I am doing whilst I've got this garden bed half empty before I've really gotten very much soil back in, is to do some running repairs on my loose brick walls. Now, a lot of people have a lot of things to say about what you should make your raised garden beds out of, and I've chosen loose brick for a couple of reasons. One, it leaves lots of little crevices and holes for the insects and the bugs to live in, so it supports a more diverse ecosystem. Two, this is a way of recycling some materials that we already had. Three, they're not permanent. They're quite strong and you can sit on the edge of them to work, but because they're not permanent and they are still pretty strong, you can change them. So, you know, if I wanted to rearrange the entire layout here of my vegetable garden, I still can. This is flexible and it allows the garden to evolve and change with time. To keep the experiment even, today we're also digging over this half of this bed really thoroughly. Now that I have the bed mostly filled up, it's time to start putting on the compost. Now I'm just adding that top layer of compost. I'm going to gently mix the first bit in and then just layer the next lot on top.
And now I'm just going to tie these at the top, these 3 sticks, to make a teepee or a wigwam or a tripod or plant support, whatever you want to call it. And then underneath here, I'm going to plant a climbing bean. It's a purple potted variety called Violetta. It's an old Italian sort which tend to do really well here. There we go, that looks nice and strong and should hold a good crop of beans. So, I'm just going to take these out. Not quite as developed as I'd hoped, but let me just take that crock out the bottom. But my plan is that we're then going to plant these, not that one, but we'll plant these one on the inside edge of each of these 3 supports. Gently, gently, so we damage as few roots as possible. And then he'll grow up that support, up the top, and hopefully, maybe a bit deeper, and hopefully produce a whole lot of fruit. Here we go. Great. Now, anytime you plant anything, always make sure to give them a really good soak. I'm going to sow some carrots. This soil is now really loose, and so normally I would have sowed carrots long before this, and in fact I did, but unfortunately the vole got most of them. So carrot seeds are tiny, but I just have a small amount. It's a tiny percentage of a packet of seeds, but I'm just going to then sprinkle them very thinly along my little line, trying to keep them as spaced out as I can. I'll take that big old seed out. Sprinkle the seed very thinly along that line. And then I'm just going to run my fingers back across either side where I've got a little ridge, just to cover them over. And that's plenty. And then I'll put my plant label for the carrots, mrkva for carrots, here at the end of that row. The plan is that I will plant some really tempting things like radishes and carrots and beans in both of these beds, so that if the voles come through, we'll see them really do that. I'm not too worried about sowing thinly for these radishes because they're my own seed-saved ones and the germination rate is reasonably poor. So, rotkvitsa, or radish, sown. And I'll pop his label on just there, like that. One thing I really don't understand is why more people don't grow chamomile. Soft, ferny foliage, beautiful, happy, daisy-like flowers. They're great for the bees, they're nice open and they're feasting away. And best of all, they add this beautiful splash of colour and this glorious fragrance to the garden. With everything growing so strongly, weeding could be a full-time job this time of year. But that's why it's so important to mulch. I think that's all we've got time for though. So, if you like what we're doing, hit like. So it's easy to come back, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want notifications, use the bell icon below. Until next time then, do widzenia.